Chapter 9 of The Romance of Modern Engineering. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Betty B. The Romance of Modern Engineering by Archibald Williams. Chapter 9. The Loftiest Railway in the World. Change here for Mont Blanc. What a ridiculous thing, the reader will say, to talk of a railway journey to the summit of Europe. Well, Mont Blanc is inviolate at present. It is still a feat to reach the snowy top, and to win a head guide's diploma to show that you have attained the mountaineer's desire. But engineers are very persistent, and acting on the principle that where man can make a path, he can make a railway, have attacked Snowdon and the Rigi and Pilatus and the Jungfrau herself. It seems a daring thing to attempt a steel track to the topmost peak of one of the loftiest Alps, over which the tourist shall roll in comfort to altitudes hitherto attainable only by sweat of brow and the exercise of iron nerves. The days are fast passing when the ascent of the Jungfrau will be considered an achievement, for electric drills are busy at work in the mountain side, scooping out a tunnel through the calcareous rock. The Jungfrau line, starting from Scheidegg, will bore its devious way upwards for 8 miles, until a point 200 feet below the summit is reached. The track will be almost entirely in tunnel. The motive force, electricity, is derived from 2 stations at Lauterbrunnen and Grindelwald, where water turbines driven by mountain streams yield an aggregate of nearly 5,000 horsepower. Urged by powerful currents, the cars will slowly climb, unseen, to the limit platform, 14,000 feet above sea level. An electric lift will transport the tourist to the very summit, which commands one of the finest views in the world, including the Finsteraarhorn, the Weisshorn, Monte Rosa, etc. That science may wait upon pleasure. An observatory will be erected for meteorological ends on the crest of the Jungfrau. This is the latter-day style of mountaineering. The Mark Twain, or Tartarin of another generation, will be mainly occupied in chronicling a series of railway journeys. How many people know where to look for the highest railway in the world? Not in Switzerland, nor in the Himalayas, where the Sibi and Darjeeling lines push far up towards the clouds, nor in the Rockies, crossed by several marvels of engineering, nor yet in Mexico, a land of great elevations. No, go to Peru. There you will find the loftiest lines hitherto laid by the engineer. Peru has 2 chief tracks, one from Callao on the coast to Arroyo on the Montana or eastern slope of the Andes, a second from Molendo on the Pacific to Lake Titicaca, throwing off a branch northwards to Santa Rosa on the road to Cuzco. Both these lines pass right over the Andes. The former has a total length of 140 miles, the latter of 420 miles. Both are remarkable engineering feats, but if a comparison be instituted, the Arroyo-Lima line easily bears off the palm. In about 100 miles it rises from sea level to an altitude of 15,665 feet, or to about that of the summit of Mont Blanc. In a few hours the traveler is transported from tropical surroundings to the neighborhood of eternal snow, where for a time he falls a prey to the soroche, or mountain sickness. The line is the first section of a transcontinental route, partly by rail, partly by water over the tributaries and main stream of the Amazon. Between 1868 and 1872, the Peruvians discovered a great store of wealth in the enormous deposits of guano on the islands off the coast. Huge fortunes were made. Money was eagerly borrowed by Peru and lent by England and other countries, the greater part of which loans were spent in a lavish, almost reckless manner upon harbors, piers, and railways. Fancy prices were paid for work, costly piers and docks were constructed, and railways were projected and carried out through mountainous and desert regions, the plans of which might well have struck dismay into the most courageous engineers and investors. The construction of the Arroyo line was commenced in 1870 by Mr. Henry Meigs, the well-known American railway contractor. From Callao to Arroyo, as the crow flies, the distance is only 80 miles, but the line has a length of 140 miles owing to the multitudinous twistings and turnings, zigzags and tourniquets that distinguish its course. To its highest point, the Galera Tunnel, the railway follows the river Rimac, which it crosses repeatedly. So steep and difficult is the country that in places the line runs in galleries cut in the face of precipices by men lowered from above in boatswain's chairs, sailors proving especially useful. The rail crawls up the side of most awful chasms, every now and then plunging into the rocks to emerge perhaps onto a bridge that spans the foaming Rimac, roaring seaward hundreds of feet below. Two of the most notable crossings are those of Verrugas and the Infernillo. The first is cleared by a bridge 575 feet long in 4 spans, and is supported by iron towers, the central one of which is 252 feet in height. This viaduct, which contains 662½ tons of iron, was put together by runaway sailors accustomed to work at considerable heights. A temporary wooden staging was erected on the solid rock at each end of the viaduct, and 2 steel ropes were stretched across the valley between the towers. The various parts necessary for the erection of the piers were brought from Lima, hung on running tackle, and thus conveyed along the ropes to their destination. In spite of the difficult conditions under which the work had to be carried out, the total time occupied was but 48 days, a truly remarkable feat. At the Infernillo, where the main stream breaks through 2 perpendicular walls of solid rock 1,500 feet high, the train crosses from wall to wall, out of the tunnel on one side into the tunnel on the other over a bridge of 160 feet long, 165 feet above the seething waters. Many were the dangers to be encountered by the engineers and workmen. The work of triangulation for locating the course of tunnels and cuttings could often only be carried on from niches cut in the rock, to which the adventuresome engineer and his instruments were swung in baskets. Not less dreaded than the slippery cliffs was the verrugas fever that took a heavy toll of the laborers. This disease is peculiar to the neighborhood of the Verrugas stream, from which it gets its name. The patient is covered with large disfiguring warts, and often afflicted with them internally, in which case they usually prove fatal. It was reported that in one cutting alone no fewer than 700 died from this loathsome fever. The difficulty of getting material up to the railhead may be imagined. Roads there were none, except such as were specially cut out of the solid rock for the passage of mules. Frequently a detour of miles had to be made to reach a point but a few yards farther along the course of the railway. But in spite of almost incredible difficulties, the engineers pushed on among the rocky fastnesses to the summit of the pass at Galera, whence the track falls away gradually to the terminus at Arroyo. Travelers who have journeyed on this remarkable line, and made friends with the engineers to the extent of securing a coast on a hand car from Galera to the terminus at Callao, are one and all enthusiastic over their experience. Most of us have known the delights of flying down a hill on a cycle, or perhaps we have tasted the more sudden joys of a switchback or water chute at the exhibitions. But a 100-mile coast, unbroken, over steel rails, among most terrific precipices, through yawning tunnels, over giddy bridges at a speed that severely tries the nerves of the novice until he settles down to a fatalistic apathy, or, catching the infection of rapid motion, suggests a higher speed. Mr. Gallenga, in his interesting book on South America, thus describes his sensations. The hand car, a light, small, and low railway truck with 2 low-backed seats, and room for 2 in each, moving with the ease of a chariot in the so-called montagne russe, upon a gentle push from behind, acquires, after a few yards' slope, a momentum of which it would be awful to foretell the consequences were it not for the brakes with which it is supplied like an engine, and by which the driver has power to pull up in a few seconds, and, within a few yards of any point he may reach, in his headlong career. But the driver himself, being human, delights in that entrancing rapidity of motion, and is soon almost unconsciously swayed by the fiery instincts of a racing horse. Away you go along this curve, away you tear round that corner, away you rush and dash from turning to turning, through this cutting and that tunnel, with your face barely 1 foot from the hard jagged rocks of the cutting on your right, and your knees barely 1 foot from the brink of the dizzy precipice on your left. Down you plunge into the pitch dark tunnel, yourself without a light, without a cow catcher, without a bell or whistle to scare away the stray cattle that often run to it for shelter. Away you go, neck or nothing, till all your terrors are shaken from you, and you become a convert to the perfect safety doctrine; or, till with a fatalist's sullen courage you set your teeth hard, you fold your arms on your breast, and almost urge the driver to more speed, as if thinking that, if there is to be a smash, it may just as well be now as by and by. There are of course dangers in such a headlong rush. The curves are very sharp, and the inside rail is not sufficiently depressed to resist more than a certain amount of centrifugal force. Also rocks and stones often fall into the track, and at the sudden turns it is almost impossible to see an object a few yards ahead before the car has reached it. The ubiquitous dog, too, is found in the Andes, with its everlasting antipathy to things of swift motion. Sometimes he carries his hostility too far, and there is a collision. Well, if nothing serious results to anything except the dog. This Arroyo Railway is a very wonderful line indeed. It not only climbs higher than any other railway in the world, but provides the only road in the world down which a man on wheels can travel for over 100 miles by his own momentum, and practically at any pace to which the fiend of recklessness may urge him. You start under the eye of the eternal snows, and you finish among humming birds and palms. You start sick with the unspeakable sickness of soroche, and you finish in the ecstasy of an exultation too great for words. On the Darjeeling Railway the would-be scorcher may experience the same delights for a more limited period, and on the Great Divide of the Trans-American lines. End of chapter 9.